It's time for another album recommendation. We're going to take a look at some classic prog today. This is Trick of the Tail by Genesis. Now, right off the bat, I'll admit that I wasn't a huge Genesis fan until a couple years ago. I kind of didn't get Genesis when I was younger. I loved Yes and Pink Floyd and of course Rush, but Genesis didn't click with me until recently. And I think it's because I've gotten older and a little more mature. And this music is really deep and complex. And as I've grown as a songwriter and a musician, I think I've come to appreciate it a lot more, especially the early proggy Genesis records. Now I'm going to be talking about Trick of the Tail today, but really I'm going to be recommending every single classic Genesis album. I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. Selling England by the Pound is objectively maybe their best album and is one of the most important classic prog albums. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is a super ambitious album that's really great as well. But Trick of the Tail works for me personally for a lot of reasons, and I'm going to go into some of those. A Trick of the Tail is the first Genesis album to not have Peter Gabriel on it, and it features Phil Collins on lead vocals. And I have a super soft spot for Phil Collins, and not just his Genesis stuff, but his poppy stuff as well. And this album works really well for me because it's the marriage of Phil Collins' voice, which I love, with the experimental proggy side of Genesis. You still have a lot of the other core members of the band, like Tony Banks and Steve Hackett. So you still get that experimental proggy side of Genesis, but you also get a little bit more of the poppy side with Phil Collins. This is probably the band's most complete album. I don't think there's a bad song on here, and it flows really nicely. For instance, you have Dance on a Volcano to start it off, and that's a really complex, progressive song that you would expect to hear from a band like this. But then right after that, it's into Entangled, which is a beautiful, haunting, moving ballad. And they kind of do back and forth between these different feels throughout. There's a nice contrast, and it keeps the listening experience really fresh. You have fun songs like Robbery, Assault, Battery, and then the title track, Trick of the Tail, which is shorter and a little bit simpler. And then you have Ripples, which is my favorite song on the album, and maybe my favorite Genesis song. And I've loved this song since I was 17, even before I had listened to Genesis in any sort of real way. This song just has always stuck with me. I think the chord progressions are beautiful. The melodies are really nice. It's interesting. There's a faster bridge section which kind of builds things up. It just has a nice flow, and it's always stuck with me. It's probably one of the things that makes this my favorite Genesis album. This album turns 45 years old this year. And if you're someone who's used to listening to newer prog, like I'm guessing a lot of the followers of my channel are, I would just urge you, when you're listening to this, to remember the time period that it came out in. Now, I think the production on this album is really great, especially for the time. The mix is good, the playing is super tight, and everything is arranged really well. But you're not going to get that loud, modern, really polished kind of production you'd be used to in a modern prog album. And if you understand that when you go into listening to this, I think there's a lot you can glean out of this album. When you listen to it, there's a lot of things they do that you can hear in newer prog and really any prog that came after this. I think these early Genesis albums are some of the most important classic prog albums. And I think Genesis maybe gets a little bit of a bad rap because they kind of turned into a pop act in the 80s. But these classic Genesis albums have a lot that you can learn from. So check Trick of the Tail out first because I think it's maybe the most accessible of these early Genesis albums. Let me know what you think. And if you have a favorite Genesis album or song, post that in the comments and let me know. And until next time, stay proggy.